Hello, my name is Yumeng Sun, and I'm a fourth-year psychology student. I'm presenting the findings from my target question. How does prenatal maternal stress impact infant temperaments? It is not easy to bring a baby into this world. Expectant mothers worry that their stress will affect their unborn baby's temperament. In this presentation, I will be answering the following questions with findings from 3 studies. Does prenatal stress actually affect an infant's temperament? What type and how much prenatal stress will impact an infant's temperament? Which trimester does prenatal stress have the most impact on temperament? Which types or dimensions of infant temperaments will be affected? During this presentation, I will be covering the following items. What is temperament? I will be explaining my key term temperament, and I will be walking through findings from 3 studies to answer my research questions. I will be sharing key takeaways and explain why this research is important. I will be defining our key term temperament. Temperament is the appearing stable individual differences in reactivity and self-regulation. In other words, it is your prevailing mood or mood patterns. For example, your temperament can be outgoing and active, or on the flip side, calm and reserved. The term reactivity means how quick or intense you are when faced with emotional arousal, attention, and motor activity. The term self-regulation refers to your control in suppressing or changing your natural response. For example, it is how you are able to manage your negative emotions while experiencing an unpleasant event. Temperament has 2 dimensions. One is fearful distress dimension, which means shy children would tend to withdraw when presented in new environments or with new things. The other one is positive affect dimension, which means sociable children would tend to approach new things or environment. In this section, I will be walking through findings from 3 studies. A study conducted in 2015 by LeBlanc et al. Had demonstrated that prenatal maternal stress caused by natural disaster during pregnancy influences infant temperament. Specifically, LeBlanc et al. Explored the impacts of 2 forms of prenatal maternal stress: objective hardship and subjective distress. This study investigated 176 white French-Canadian women who had experienced the 1998 Quebec ice storm. In this situation, objective hardship was assessed by the severity of storm-related events that were experienced, such as living without electricity. Subjective distress was assessed by how the participant felt in those events. These participants were asked to complete questionnaires on their infants at 6 months postpartum. Findings indicate that women in the first trimester during the storm reported higher levels of subjective distress and objective hardship and rated their infants as more difficult than others. Specifically, mothers who experienced more subjective distress during the storm reported their infants are less responsive or dullness and require more attention. However, LeBlanc et al. 2015 had several limitations. First, they recruited a small participant sample. Second, the participants were all white French Canadian, lacking racial and ethnic diversity. Third, this study lacks a non-exposed control group, so the results may not be accurate. Fourth, the sex differences of infants' temperament was not stated. Fifth, it lacks third-party evaluation of infant temperament. The mother's rating may be objective and inaccurate. Seventh, it lacks the assessment of prenatal maternal stress 5 to 6 months after the crisis. Eighth, it lacks measuring other types of infant's temperament like reactivity and self-regulation. Tying back to my research questions, LeBlanc et al. 2015 answered a few of them. Disaster-related prenatal stress will affect an infant's temperament of fluffy or difficult, dullness and attention-seeking. And the prenatal maternal stress in the first trimester will have the most influence on an infant's temperament. To address gaps in the previous study, I reviewed a 2017 study conducted by Bush et al. This study investigated the association between prenatal maternal stress and infant temperament, particularly differences in reactivity and regulation. Unlike the previous study, this study sampled 151 racially and ethnically diverse low-income mother-infant pairs. Mothers who were invited to complete a questionnaire called the behavior questionnaire to assess their infant's temperament. This questionnaire assessed infants' regulation, surgency, and activity. As a side note, infant regulation was measured by scoring reactions like vocal reactivity, smelling, laughter. Infant surgency, or in other words, extroversion, was measured by scoring reactions like cuddliness and soothability. Infant activity was measured by scoring reactions like falling and fear. Results from Bush et al. Show that higher prenatal stress that the mother perceived, the lower they rated their infant or on surgency and regulation. Bush et al. 2017 has several limitations. First, the sample size is still very small. Second, the self-reported maternal stress and infant temperament could introduce potential bias so that it minimizes confidence in the results. Third, half of the questionnaires were complete at home and not in a monitored setting, which compromises the quality and completeness. Fourth, a study also did not have a full range of stress levels. Fifth, few female participants had low levels of exposure to major adverse events, so the severity of maternal stress baseline was not controlled. Sixth, sex differences of infants' temperament was not accounted for. Tying back to my research questions, Bush et al. 2017 answered another research question. Higher ratings of perceived prenatal stress will have more impact on infant surgency and regulation in temperament. Both of the previous studies had limitation of not accounting for sex differences between boys and girls when measuring infant temperament. I reviewed the study conducted in 2017 by Simcock et al., which addresses the gap. This study investigated whether an infant sex will moderate or lessen the influence of prenatal stress caused by a disaster on infant temperament. This study sampled 121 pregnant mothers who had experienced the 2011 Queensland flood, using the short temperament scale for infants, or STSI, to rate their infants at 6 months of age. The STSI is a 30-item questionnaire for Australian infants aged from 4 to 8 months. The STSI consists of 5 dimensions of infant temperament, with 6 questions per dimension. The 5 dimensions that were measured include approach, whether the infant is adaptable to change. For example, will the infant be all right with a change in feeding place or person feeding him or her? Rhythmicity, whether the infant has a regular schedule in activities like sleeping and eating. Cooperation manageability, whether the infant is happy during feeding. Activity reactivity, whether the infant moves or squirms a lot while laying down. Erectability, whether the infant continues to cry even after trying to smooth him or her. Their findings indicate that high levels of subjective prenatal stress predict more cooperative, manageable infant behavior. Additionally, there was a difference between boys and girls in the relationship between their erectability and their mother's objective hardship. For boys, They scored higher in irritability than the girls when their mother's objective hardship was lower. For girls, however, their mother's stress levels did not affect the girls' irritability ratings. Simcoe et al. Has several limitations. First, the sample size of this study is relatively small. Second, participants from this study are general, homogeneous, and socioeconomically advantaged community samples, which may have made detecting significant effects of prenatal maternal stress difficult, and may limit the generalizability of the findings. Third, the mother's self-report of both their own experiences and infant temperament might have recall biases. Tying back to my research questions, Simcoe et al. 2017 answered my target question by stating disaster-related prenatal stress will impact infant temperaments of cooperative, manageable behavior and irritability. In conclusion, from the studies conducted by LeBlanc et al. 2015, Bush et al. 2017, and Simcoe et al. 2017, we found that prenatal stress does affect an infant's temperament. Disaster-related prenatal stress will affect an infant's temperament. Higher ratings of perceived prenatal stress will have more impact on infant surgency and regulation. Prenatal maternal stress in the first trimester will have the most influence on an infant's temperament. Disaster-related prenatal stress will impact infant temperaments of cooperative, manageable behavior and irritability. However, keep in mind the limitations of these studies, which include small sample sizes, alike in racial and socioeconomic diversity within the sample, biases from self-reporting maternal stress and infant temperaments, and sex differences in measuring infant's temperament. Prenatal environmental influences impact children's health and development. The most notable ones are tetrodotoxins, or substances that may produce physical and psychological defects in unborn babies, like tobacco and heroin. Beyond this, prenatal maternal stress, which is a normal experience during pregnancy, also affects children's health, particularly infant temperament development. The findings from the aforementioned studies are important in demonstrating how managing prenatal stress may have favorable outcomes for temperament development and longer-term benefits in adolescence and adulthood. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.